Thank you.
You sit astride your faithful steed in a dark forest. The trees are dense and impenetrable. Shadows loom. A narrow path winds north. What do you do?
Go south.
That's right. You go north. In fact, you delve northwards. Something moves in the tree line. A shadowy figure emerges, blocking your path. They want to trade. They offer you an AI assistant that can ride your horse for you to automate navigation and increase the efficiency of your adventure. What do you do? Well, maybe you just sort of say, what? Maybe you look over to the DM and say, this is a little bit contrived, isn't it? Are you trying to make a point? Or maybe you're a good adventurer following a classic archetype and you choose violence. You reach behind your cloak. Your hand grips the handle of your hunting knife. You pull it back, and I am sorry, as a large language model, I can't engage in a conversation that encourages or promotes violence. Perhaps we can find a different approach to resolve the situation peacefully. I'm here to help. Violence ensues, at least to the laptop. So hi, I'm Chris. I'm an engineer at Hidden Door. Before that, I have a decade of experience doing machine learning stuff in the tech industry, and before that, I researched fundamental particles. At Hidden Door, we make a game where you can play in worlds that you already love, and make them yours. It's a web game, so you can go to hiddendoor.co and play right now. I would describe us as being like open alpha, moving towards open beta. So go, send me your bugs, send me your weird stuff. What are the worlds you love? Well, the worlds you love might be like the Call of Cthulhu, the Wizard of Oz, coming soon, Pride and Prejudice, actually super fun, very excited about that. These are all clearly public domain works for a reason, but also some licensed works like The Crow from Pressman Film, not the 2024 reboot, the original. Other stuff like I Can't Talk About It and What Are You Trying to Get Me Fired? Just for orientation, this is what the game looks like. It's a text adventure game. So you have this setup that we generate with our engine, and then you have a little interface to say what you do. And you can select from like prefabbed options, or you can type in anything you like, and the world will respond. Over to your right, you can see that we are currently in a dumpster of despair. That's a location, and it's there to show you that there is actually a game state underlying the world, right? This is not chat with a large language model. So if you wanted to build like a modern text adventure in a world that already exists, how would you go about it? Well, you could take a classic text adventure approach. That's maybe the first thing that comes to mind. Zork is great. I love classic text adventures. They're good for like highly authored content where you really want to convey a specific narrative. But they're very finite state. So you can only do certain things. There's a fixed grammar of interaction with the world. You can go north, but you can't saunter north. And the world will likewise respond only in scripted ways. What's become possible in the last couple of years is to close all of the doors and windows in your house, find a dark, quiet place, light a single candle, kneel and make a sacrifice, and pray to the LLM gods. Say, you are the dungeon master, give me a story. And they'll do like an okay job, but the story will have no crunch, it will have no stakes, and it's what Gen Z would call mid. Now, I am the parent to a delightful tiny human who, like all toddlers, is some percentage delight, like 90% delight and 10% purest barbarian rage. I don't have time for mid content. Like I barely have time for content at all. Like I barely get to read or play. I don't want it to, there's no use for this mile wide, inch deep stuff. So let's try and build something better. So how we actually find our way through is to use things for what they're good at. The past decade has seen an explosion of machine learning and NLP, natural language processing research. For instance, we have easy, good contextual embeddings, which make language computable. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but an embedding is a vector representation of, in this case, text. They're the things that let me say, like, foo is to bar as baz is to quux, or if you add foo to bar, you get whatever. They let us do linear algebra on words. And we've had word embeddings for a long time, but the more recent development is that we now have like contextual embeddings. So it's not like what is the meaning of the word, it's what was the meaning of the word in this sentence, or what is the meaning of the sentence in the document without just doing an average of the embeddings or something. So the like semantic representational capacity of embeddings has quietly increased enormously over the last few years. And this is made easier by having production-grade NLP libraries without having to write Java, which is good for me. We have a host of pre-trained models. Like before we got to what we now call LLMs, it was like 2016, we got the transformer architecture. Those models are still useful for things. Like you can run them comfortably on a laptop. It's not like, let's quantize everything and condense it down to the smallest possible thing to maybe run it really slowly on a laptop. Like there are good models that are available that you can comfortably run. And yeah, of course, we've got like LLMs too. I probably don't need to introduce large language models to this crowd, but I do want to frame them in a particular way. Large language models are conditional probability distributions over tokens. They're trained to predict the next token. They fill in the blank in, let's go to the foo, right? And all of the emergent capability that they have, so it's limited reasoning capacity, the like implicit world model perhaps, is in service of that goal. So if you think about how language arises in the world, the generative process for that is like the world. It's everything that happens. And LLMs aren't modeling that generative process. They're modeling the output, and that's a different thing. And if you understand this, like almost all of the failure modes of LLMs are entirely predictable. Like they don't have a notion of truth. It's a category error to say that an LLM is lying to you. It's not. It's predicting the next token. But that doesn't mean they're not useful. Like if you ask an LLM, can a mouse jump over the Statue of Liberty? It's going to say no. So there is a notion of physics in there. It's just one that arises from language. And there's a bunch of trade-offs to that. But yeah, they're still useful. So they're great at style transfer. I can say, like, take this sentence and make it pirate, and the LLM is going to do a great job. They're good at rearranging information that's in their context window, which means they're also good at extracting information from their context window. And they're good at summarizing. I don't think LLMs, and these are fighting words, are good at creativity. At least they're not good about the kind of creativity that I care about. Which is very like authorial and opinionated, and humans are good at that. So we can work together. So I think the way that we actually find our way out of the like infinite mid content is to embrace the notion of authorship. Now there are many authors to every story in the world. In our game there are three. There's the creator. That's like what you think of as the author of a world. Jane Austen for Pride and Prejudice. Pressman Film for The Crow. The IP owner, like the licensor, if you will. Then there's a developer, that's me. That's probably you, especially if you're using these tools. It's my wonderful colleagues. And then there's the player, that's also me, maybe also you. It's people on the internet, people who are like living through the story. I'm going to talk about each in turn. The main thing I have to say about the first author is principles, let's have them. Large language models are a fraught technology already. Largely because of the like uncertain provenance of their training data, and the like IP law is not settled there yet, but the norms around how the technology is used are being set now by what we build with it. And it would certainly be possible to take this technology and use it in a very extractive way. It's also possible to not. Like I think there is a version of this we can do where authors continue to be rewarded for their creations and artists continue to have jobs. And I think it's a better one. And I think we should do that one. Okay, tech stuff, developer. Here I want to suggest that authorship is extremely akin to structure. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You can imagine kind of two ways of interacting with a language model here. One is like a long-lived context where it's like chat, 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 chat. The language model gives me something, I respond. And it's not totally unstructured. There's messages from the model, there's messages from me. There's programming to do to build that kind of system. But the content of the world that you're describing, the game that you're describing, all happens in text, and that is unstructured data. There are like no affordances there. Chat is like a good interface for some things and a terrible interface for other things. Like you can't, like there's no way of hooking on to the fact that the character has zero energy if it's only described in text. And you might want consequences for that kind of thing. So the other thing you can do is to engage in the dance of trying to synchronize a game state with narrative. And it goes both directions, right? You generate narrative from game state and game state from narrative. And it's much more complicated, but it gives you many more affordances. So like the processing of one of our turns looks much more like the picture on the right than the picture on the left. And we use the full gamut of NLP technology. This is not chat with GPT. This is, yes, there are calls to language models. There's also like a bunch of embedding. There's vector search. There's like Postgres databases with words in them. So this isn't like a first-person shooter, right? It's a turn-based text adventure. We have time to hit databases. We have time to make language calls. If you're hitting an external API for a large language model, like nothing else matters performance-wise. That is you're entirely network-bound. And I can talk, if you want, like over coffee, about all of the ways that LLMs break application architecture. They're multitudinous. Everything has to be extremely concurrent. You want to like speculatively execute everything. But that's not quite what this talks about. So yeah, so you can do this dance and make lots of different like atomic calls to try and synchronize game state and narrative. And I think atomic is the word there. Like interactions with LLMs stay atomic. Because we're doing this dance, we can be extremely precise about what context we provide to a given call. So we say like, I just want the last turn's events and these three characters, the stats of these three characters, whatever. There's your context, and that will get you a different result than like, here's all of the context, please just be good. And so the game state that we extract from that has like a couple of layers. There is the layer of the world, which we'll talk about in author 3, which is like entities like characters, locations, items, the rules, whatever. And then there's the layer of the story. So of course there's like, free text is the story, but there's also, underneath that, there's an engine for the story, which is mostly, like think of it as like combinatorial trope soup. Just to peek under the hood a little further, this is pseudocode. It's not exactly what the code looks like. It's not that different, though. Like, it's a little more complicated for prod reasons and stuff. The kind of tropes you might have, like you might have a lecture hall trope that has a bunch of metadata associated with it so that we know when to pull it into a story, like when is the right context for that, what kind of story would have this sort of thing. And then there are elements associated with it. So like you might have an eccentric speaker. You might have a malfunctioning projector. Obviously, everyone is paying rapt attention. And a bunch of other stuff. So as well as tropes that we might attach to an entity like that, we have these narrative tropes that are like, we call them threads. There are certain story beats that you expect if you're in a certain kind of scene. So if you're in like a chase scene, you kind of expect the protagonist is going to be waylaid by something. Maybe they trip over a barrel. Maybe there's a like Scooby-Doo moment of in and out of like different doors in a corridor. And so we represent those with threads. And we have this lightweight templating syntax where, we can reference things in the world. And the variables in those things are real entities in the world. So the barrel that you trip over might, spill some bananas out or something, and you can pick up a banana and then it's in your inventory. And this is an example of using LLMs for something they're good at, which is like in the moment contextualizing story. So you can imagine that in Pride and Prejudice, the eccentric speaker might be like a matronly math tutor in an old schoolroom. The eccentric speaker in a cyberpunk story might be like a techno priest to some machine god. LLMs are awesome at that stuff. I should say, this is one of the ways that we inject authorship that we control into the game. And we're so sincere about this that we hire narrative designers. Like, we just hired a narrative designer like a month ago, which is awesome, to write this stuff. We don't get to give up the idea of like creating content for a game just because there's an LLM. Okay, author 3, the player. I think the key to understanding the way in which players author their own stories is to appreciate that language is a unique affordance. So here we have like another pseudocode representation. We might have an entity class. It's got name, character, pronoun, energy, mind, body, heart, stats. We're quite stat light in our game. And clearly in the real thing, location points to an ID for a richer representation, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a structured representation of all the entities in the game, but also language is load-bearing. So we have this, we borrowed the name aspects from a tabletop RPG called Fate, but we attach language to entities, And then that is actually load-bearing in the game. So my strong character, my character that has the same stats as your character, maxed out on strength, nothing else, will have different affordances in play, will have different suggested actions, things will go differently for them, have a different play experience, just because of the language. Maybe I'm a himbo, and with tons of energy, and you are like a mighty warrior, and we have the same technical representation at the stat level, but language actually gives us unique experiences. So that's one way that the player authors their own story. Another is through what we call authorship moments. This is like literal authorship. So we shipped a version of the origin story for the Crow, and like spoiler alert, the origin story for the Crow, you and your lover are murdered, and you rise from the dead to avenge that murder. And the first strong feedback we got from players on that was, I don't want you authoring my lover. I want to say who my lover is. So we shipped an interface where we let the player choose certain characteristics of their lover and then provide some words to inspire the story, and we generate something. So here we got Annette, who wears a watermelon ascot, a defiant symbol of her refusal to surrender to the darkness that surrounds her. And this is cool. Like, it's fun to... it's like a tiny playground for within the game. The trouble is, when you generate entities like this, LLMs are super biased, and their bias is an artifact of the way they're trained. It's not going away, right? They're trained on the internet mostly. It's like there are certain correlations that they will learn because they do not have a causal model of the world. They will learn the correlations that exist there. And so if you ask for 5 gangsters, which we did, you're going to get 5 Italian Americans, and they're going to be called like Vince, Vincent, Vinny, Vincenzo, and Vin. And that's bad, because it's racist. It doesn't really need another one, but it's also boring. Like, tropes are awesome. Tropes give you a hook to hang your story hat on. They're like a familiar reference point that people can use to navigate a narrative. But some of the most fun story moments, not just in our game, but in any game, I think come from subverting tropes. Like, there is a distinction, there is a line somewhere, and it's kind of fuzzy, between a trope and a stereotype. And like, stereotypes are bad and tropes are good. Fortunately, because we do this dance of trying to synchronize game state and narrative, we have these really granular representations of entities. And that means that gives us like surgical control over what context we provide to a given generation prompt. So instead of saying, give me 5 gangsters, I can say, give me a gangster, and they have to be called Carla, they have to be she. Now, maybe have like a richer description, just a gangster. But just generate the aspects and generate the mind, body, heart stat. Or I could say, like, here's a character, and their highest stat is heart. Fill in everything else. Like, we can mix this up any way we like. And this is really like an example. Yes, we use like generation, but it's also an example of using language models to choose rather than generate. So like, generation is the API for a language model. And even though the world that they model is language, not sort of the true generative processes of the world, they'll have a lot of like knowledge encoded in that language. And so you can use them to choose stuff. You can use them to say, like, you know, choose among these options. And you still get the benefit of the natural language understanding without like the wild free form, you know, anything could happen. Yeah, and then again, like in game, we don't generate everything, so we use the full gamut of NLP technology. We do a ton with embeddings. Actually, the aspects attached to player characters are fetched with semantic search, like a weighted semantic search. I think that's a good place to zoom up a little bit. There is so much hype surrounding language model technology, and eventually it's going to go away. And when the LLM hype goes away, we're going to be left with a couple of things, some like regrettable poetry, some art that made me feel nothing, sad maybe, then sort of 2 important things, and they are the tools that we create, like the new tools that language models represent, and the things that we made with them. And I'd really like to think that we use this tech to build new cool stuff that like enables like new modes of play. rather than just like automating all of the fun parts of game creation. And I think a subtext to this is that I don't think game AI is going away. Like, game AI doesn't get swallowed by LLMs at all. And in fact, they're like LLMs without human sort of programmatic control are not that exciting. So like, choose this one. So next time you are riding a horse through a forest and someone tries to sell you on an AI to automate the human parts out of creativity, choose violence. That's me, hiddendoor.co to play the game, and my personal, much neglected blog is at standard.dev.